Hello, folks. I would like to entitle this message The Crucifixion of Don Parnell. And before I get into that, I want to start with a few little odds and ends of things that I would like to clear up. Because I think that we don't want to sound, people that have some of these ideas, we don't want to sound disingenuous or that I think there was the scripture in the Bible, something to the effect of, do not let your good be evil spoken of. So I don't want to give false impressions as to how we think about things and what we believe. And because that could be done. Like, I'll give you all an example. Uh, the, okay, I don't know just exactly where to start with this, but like, I think that the third coming, for example, or the third testament, I mean, and not just the third testament, but generally all the people who still to this day believe in good and evil, or good and bad, or however, or holy and unholy, in the traditional terms. It's we need to clear up how we mean that so that it does not come across as disingenuous. Because the fact is that we have a holiness all our own. Anybody, we have, see, there's a big difference between having thrown away the concepts of good and evil and good and bad and all those things and having transcended those things. Because if you transcend things, you do not, and that's different than just throwing them out. We didn't become like, we didn't take traditional Christianity and become traditional atheists. Well, that's not what we did, because a lot of people would probably think that this has become traditional, like more like a traditional atheist, and that's absolutely not the case. What we did was we transcended traditional Christianity. We did not become traditional atheists in the process. We became a transcended version, basically, of Christianity. We became a transcended version of good and evil and good and bad, as opposed to being the old traditional version of it. That's quite a bit different. Okay, than being, like I said, a traditional atheist. The that's pretty much entirely different. We see, everybody's talking about holiness. They're always talking about being holy. The Third Testament people all the time talking about being holy, and people being evil because they believe this or that. They believe in God and Satan are one, and they say, well, they're just evil and this and that, and they're just, and we've got to be holy. The holiness, when you transcend all those traditional thinkings that the Third Testament and on back have, then we didn't lose holiness. We actually gained it. We became, there's a holiness all to the transcendent understanding of things. And they think that, well, we're unholy because you have these ideas. And that's absolutely not true. In fact, let me put it to you this way. Truthfully, actually, we are more holy, because the unholy, the way to be holy is to stop trying to be holy, because it just does not work in this generation. Mm-hmm. You have to understand that when things change, they change. You don't go by the way it used to be. You don't. If you've got to, you've got to burn that up and move on. You've got to leave Egypt. You've got to move on. Okay, so if you try to keep those things, then you end up being unholy, and you've got to move on and transcend. So, I'll give you all an example. I was talking to Lucas Taylor the other day, or just today, and me and Luke was talking about how that, I had been doing truck driving, and Lucas has got this job where he's like, he goes off and works like 5 weeks in a row every day, like I don't know, 70 hours a week or something crazy, and we was talking. He was like, man, I ain't shaved in like 2 weeks. We was like I'm starting to look like Grizzly Adams. It's like we always say here in the South, we always got the saying of, if you haven't shaved in like a couple days or something, say, you always rub your beard and like, man, I'm starting to look like Grizzly Adams. Grizzly Adams was a guy. He was a Western pioneer guy that would had a big beard, and he would like train bears and stuff. We call him Grizzly Adams. So we always say, if you haven't shaved in a couple of weeks or a week, you're like, man, I start to feel like Grizzly Adams. And so anyway, Luke, he's like, and I was like, yeah, man. Whenever I was out on driving the truck, I went for like 5 days and didn't take a shower, man. I was like, I know what you're talking about. It's tough, And Luke has come up with the idea. He's like, hey, isn't that like, wasn't there something in the Bible about repenting repenting like in dust or something? And I was like, yeah, that's repenting in sackcloth and ashes, And I said, see there, Luke. I said, that's what I'm always saying, is that all the things that was going on back there, we're doing them subconsciously. We don't need to do them. You don't need to actually get out here if you've done something wrong and repent and pour dust on your head or any of this stuff. You don't need to try to be holy at all, is what I'm saying. Because the Third Testament people are still concerned about trying to be holy. You don't need to try to be holy. You are holy. You are subconsciously being holy. You are subconsciously fasting. Because he was like, me and Lucas was talking about, fasting. And he's like, yeah, you go for like long periods. We'll be working, go for like long periods and not eat or do this or that or whatever, or just working in general. Just working for our families or whatever. It's a sacrifice. It's a sacrifice. It's a fasting. It's everything. Everything that we're doing now in our daily lives are the things that they did there, brought up into this, transcended into this modern generation. We are holy just by the lives that we live. We are repenting in sackcloth and ashes and fasting and doing everything that the Old Testament and the New Testament and the early Third Testament could ever think of to make a person holy. We do it just by the days, just by living our lives. The most unholy thing you can do right now is try to be holy. Stop trying to be holy. You are holy. You're already there. You're already repenting in sackcloth and ashes. You're already fasting. You're already anything that you can think of. You're already Jesus up on the mountain turning down the devil that was going to give everything. And of course they say, well, yeah, but you all think that the devil and God are one. How can you even say that? How it works is yes, the devil and God are one in some sense of they are one in modern doctrinal understanding, but it's still a Christ defeating the devil in the same sense of that. If you all I'm telling you is all the things that you could find in the Bible, we're doing. Okay, we're already doing them. We're being tempted of the devil. Okay, so truthfully, I know that's a little hard to figure out, but truthfully, in my opinion, like I said, the most unholy thing you can do is to try to be holy. Stop trying to be these things, and you will understand that you just are. And everybody wants to fight about and say, well, you got to be holy, and these people are evil, and this and that. That's the most unholy thing you can do. That is, if I'm going to be tempted of the devil, that's it. These message people, you want to know what, the Third Coming people said, well, the message, that's the devil right there. And that's the truth. They were. And the leftover carried over things that the message people brought over has been the devil itself. You talk about, like I said, we have we have not gotten rid of the concept of the devil and God. We have just transcended it. There's a big difference there. If you transcend it, then you don't lose all the concepts. You don't. I hope I didn't confuse people there earlier, but you don't lose the concept of God, of like Jesus overcoming the devil. You don't lose that if you transcend it. Even if the doctrine of the day is that God and Satan are one, even if, or at least was here recently up to some point here, even if that's the case, you still do not lose. You've got to transcend these things, and you don't lose the fact of Jesus defeating the devil in that sensible way, even if the devil and God are one. Okay, I know that sounds crazy, but like I said, you've got to. It's a transcension. It's a transcension away from good and evil in the traditional terms. It's not that we don't have. Let me put it this way: it's not that we don't have Jesus overcoming the devil on the Mount of Temptation over here now. It's just that it's a transcended version of it. We didn't get rid of that. We just transcended the traditional version of it. Everybody out here, the Third Testament and on back, are going by the old version of that. And they don't realize that you can transcend that, still have that. You don't have to get rid of it. Because they think that everybody that went on in everything else, they equate them to atheists. And it's not true. We are, in fact, a transcended version of Christianity. It's not atheism. It's a transcended version of Christ overcoming the devil on the Mount of Temptation or whatever. It's a transcended version of that. But they can't seem to understand the transcension. And they say, oh, well, it's just they just don't believe in it anymore, and they're practically devils. No. That's exactly wrong. That's not true at all. That's, in fact, the devils are the ones that are still stuck in that old message. They're the devils. It's the ones that are saying that the transition, like I said, it's making our good out to be evil. We cannot let our good be evil spoken of. I'm tired of this, them trying to make this out to look like it's evil. And don't get me wrong. Like I said, there was a denominational aspect of it with the love divine that, in fact, as true as the love divine was, they made it denominational. Like I said, when it came to what the love divine did was they took things that were right. Like, for example, no more right and wrong, essentially. That was right. They took things like God and the devil are one. That was right. But what they did with it was, as right and as true as those things were, they made them denominational. They made it as though that was the doctrinal the doctrinal idea that was the right thing, and then proceeded to fight everybody who with equal ferocity of the other ones against their doctrines of saying that no, they had went too far. And in the process of that, they essentially, the love divine essentially, as right as they were, they nullified any good that they did. That's my opinion on it. So what we have done is we have transcended the love divine now. We have went beyond the love divine. And I hope you all understand what I'm saying. That what I'm trying to say is that the love divine, it was counterproductive. As true as it was counterproductive because it was denominal in new thinking. And that's not what you want to do. You don't want to be denominal in new thinking. You want to be, you don't want to denominalize new thinking. So I've spoke about that in some of my past sermons. So I if you want to call them sermons. So you all can maybe look that up if you want to see more into it. But I had said about how that what they were doing was they had, like William Branham said, he said, speaking in tongues was not evidence of the Holy Ghost. And I said, well, if you come over to the third coming, then what it was we knew that speaking a new message was was the modern version, the transcended version of speaking in tongues, in equivalence to what William Branham was talking about. And then I said, speaking a new message, or the transcended version of speaking in tongues, was not evidence of the Holy Ghost, or the Holy Ghost being the real, clear, and true understanding of how things really are. And I said a new message was not evidence that you had real understanding. The Love Divinic side of it had a new message. They certainly had a newer message than the Third Testament did. We all know that. And it was right. It was right. Speaking in tongues was right. We know it was. Okay? But it was not evidence that you had real understanding. And that leads smoothly right into what we're getting ready to talk about here. Because Don Parnell just preached a message called The Unity That Oneness Brings, I believe was the name of it. And that's kind of what I want to talk about today. He was talking about how that there was something better, essentially. Unity, essentially, was better than all the doctrines of oneness, Love Divinic oneness. Because he said in that sermon, he said that he could oftentimes talk to, see, what he's saying was that unity superseded, this idea of grand unity superseded how high or how new of a revelation that you have. It's essentially what he was saying. He was saying that it didn't matter how grand your revelation had gotten, because the Love Divinic people have a grand revelation. They've got to a very high level of revelation, a very new level of revelation. But it doesn't matter, because there is something that this unity, this idea of unity, supersedes even the idea of oneness. Essentially, the Love Divinic, dare I say, what had become a doctrine of oneness, as right as it was, because oneness was correct, it was right, but you can supersede that in unity, because like Don was saying, he said in that sermon, he was talking about how that he could talk to people out here that had no clue of his revelation, of what grand lofty revelation of oneness, etc., Love Divinic ideologies that you could get to. He said he could talk to people just out here on the street sometimes better than he could talk to like his own people, his own, perhaps Love Divine people or whatever. He could talk to just any standard Roman out here, I call them Romans, that you'd run into, better than he could talk to the Jews, essentially, the people who know high revelation. It's because the unity that's there supersedes how much you know. To put it in William Branham terms, William Branham said that it was better that a man, quoting the best I can, it was better that a man, he would rather have a guy who was right in his spirit and wrong in his doctrine than to have a guy that was right in his doctrine and wrong in his spirit. So what I'm saying is you could know the most grandest, furthest revelation, the most newest message of oneness in the Love Divine, and still be totally wrong in your you could be right in your doctrine and still be wrong in your spirit. And that's what we had. Really, the Love Divine knew better. They knew better than the Third Testament people did, and still to this day do. But was their spirit any good? Well, see, the unity goes above the knowledge. The spirit is better than the knowledge. It's not, you could have, I have done it myself. I've had better conversations with Baptists than I could have with Love Divine people over the years. I've done that before. And that sounds crazy, but I've done it before. Just a plain old Baptist, like he's practically a Roman now. But that's what he was trying to say, in my opinion. He gave the example he said how the Roman centurion come up to Jesus, and he's like, hey, Jesus, he's like, my servant or son or something's dying here at home. I need you to pray for him, and you don't even, I'm even worthy that you would come under my roof. Just pray for him, and I'll go home. And I know he'll be taken care of. And Jesus looks at this Roman centurion, it's a Roman general, and says, I have not found such faith in Israel. And what he was saying was who are the Israelites? I'm just saying what Don said in his sermon. He said, who are the Israelites? The Israelites are the people that know about the message, that know about the third coming, the love divine. They know about all that. These are the Israelites. They know about Williams Branham's message or whatever, on up, and on up. These are the Israelites. But you could have a better conversation with just some Roman off the street. Some guy who'd never even heard of the love divine, never heard of the Third Testament, nothing. Never heard of William Branham, nothing. You could have a better conversation with somebody out here that didn't know anything about any of that stuff. And because, it was a unity that transcended doctrine, essentially. It was a unity that transcended these things. And so anyway, I want to get into what I wanted to say, because I just wanted to clear it up to where we're at right there. And that was kind of what Don was saying. So what I'm telling you is that Don has transcended his message. He has went, and I'll prove it to you, that we have transcended the love divine message, and he has went into something that is a transcension of the love divine. It's not about do you know oneness? Do you know that the devil and God are one anymore? It ain't about that. It's about, as right as all these things were, okay, I said a long time ago I was a love diviner, but as right as all those things were, it's transcended that. It's went beyond that. And so anyway, he has went, dare I say, Don has went into, when I say Don, I mean the aura, in a sense, of the thing. But it's contained in, you could just say Don, Toriello, Yons, or whatever you want to say. The aura of it it's transcended. It's transcended away from all this. It's no more in Third Testament and love divine. It's no more there. It's transcended out of that, and it's went somewhere else. It's went into a higher dimension is what it's done. Okay, the understanding has went into a higher dimension. And here's how it happened. Here's how it happened. I had to take my shirt off. He's getting serious now. All right, here's how it all went down. Back about last October or so, before Don ever went into his surgery, he was preaching messages he preached one on the Last Supper, and then he preached one on the Crucifixion and the Resurrection, and then before he went into his surgery, I believe the very last sermon before he went into his surgery, his liver surgery, he preached one on communion, okay? And if you look back through my sermons, if you care to, there was a sermon that I preached about last November because I recognized what was going on. I don't look at things in terms of what's being said. I look at things in terms of what's really going on. Because, the Branhamite people, they made that mistake. They thought that it was in terms of, they were trying to figure out what William Branham was saying and missed what was really going on. Because they was listening to him saying, women don't cut your hair. And what was really going on was he was Elijah, and he was, and the Christ was accompanying his message, and it was the return of the Messiah right there. And they totally missed that. Okay, so I'm trying not to make that mistake anymore. So when Don says something, our prophet of this transitional age to age thing here, whenever he says something, I don't listen to what he had to say. I listen to what's really going on, I see what's really going on, what's really happening now. And so anyway, I preached a sermon on how I'd figured out that what he was saying was not what he was saying. What he was saying was not what was really happening, because he was talking about, this and that, and how that, he was talking about preaching the message on the Last Supper and what they did, this and that. Okay, but he wasn't though he was talking about that, what he was saying was he was saying this is my Last Supper. That's what he was saying. He wasn't talking about that. See, like I said in that sermon, I said, Peter and all them guys, they were talking about the drinking the wine and eating the chicken or whatever, and then Jesus is, and there's like, well, what's Jesus going on about having to die and all kinds of stuff? See, I was like, what's he talking about? They didn't know what he was, and that was basically the way I figured it with the Love Divine people or whoever, that they had missed really what he was, what Don was really saying, in the same way that the disciples had missed what Jesus was saying. And Don even said in that last sermon, he said that he could talk, he couldn't, sometimes he couldn't even do much good with his own people. His own disciples couldn't really understand him. See, the disciples, the Love Diviners, or the disciples of Don Parnell, the people that still took him as a prophet, they were unable to understand just exactly what he was doing. And so they didn't know what was going to happen. They didn't know. He was talking about he was getting ready to go be crucified, and they're like, what are you talking about, Jesus? They didn't know. So what happened was that, so I preached that message, and then Don goes and he's preaching about the Last Supper, and then he preaches communion. Okay, then communion was the last sermon that William Branham preached before he died. The communion was the last thing that Jesus took before he was up and crucified. So I knew that there was something going on. Don even said it in one of those sermons back about last fall. He said there's getting ready to be a change. So I figured out that there was something going on here that was not just him just preaching. It wasn't just him preaching. That's what they all thought. They thought it was William Branham was just preaching. They thought Jesus was just preaching. They didn't know. They didn't know what was really going on. Okay, they knew he was a prophet. That much they were able to figure out. The Love Divine people know Don Parnell's a prophet. The Message people knew, well, not the Message people, but kind of the Message people, the people that were around William Branham, they knew he was a prophet, but they didn't know what was going on. So what you got to do, though, is you got to know what's going on. You can't just know that he's a prophet and then listen to what he says and eat and drink with him, which is cool and all. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with Peter and all the disciples. So, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the Love Divine people in a sense, but because, they had to play their part of being the disciples, but they didn't get it. They didn't know what was really going on there, and which became evident, I believe, later on, nonetheless. So anyway, so what did happen? What are you telling us then? Well, why did I name this the Crucifixion of Don Parnell? Here's why. Because Don has been crucified, and I don't know if anybody even knows it. He preached the Last Supper, he preached communion, and then what happened to him? He went through surgery. Okay, so yeah, okay, no big deal. Don Parnell went through surgery, right? He survived his surgery, right? Okay, he's back to preaching now. Okay, no big deal, right? No, absolutely not. Here's what happened. Just like I said, there was something going on. They was getting ready to be crucified. I can tell you now that he was. When Don went to surgery, after he had preached the communion, he went to surgery. Okay. Here's the story. Don told it just last week on the sermon. What he did was he had to have liver surgery. And correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not too good on anatomy, but your liver's about yay here, right? I assume, right? So anyway, and they told him, they said, the nurse or whoever told him, said, you make sure you got your faculties in order, or that you're ready to go to the great beyond, as we used to call it. And because most men over 60 bleed out on the table, and they don't survive it. And so what happened was, so Don had his surgery, and then they also had to put a tube in him. He had a tube coming out of him. Whenever I went and seen him after his surgery, he still had a tube in him that was draining fluid out. Okay, so here's what happened. Don is on that table. He's on that table, that operating table. Okay, They stretch him out on an operating table. The doctor takes a knife and pierces right here. And what comes out? Blood and fluid or water. He's already been crucified, folks. The communion happened. Don's already been crucified. What happened was through his surgery, they pierced his side. The Roman doctor, like I said, I call all these people out here Romans. All these people that don't know anything about, if they don't know anything about Branham and the love divine and the Third Testament, Third Coming and all this stuff, they're Romans, okay? Not bad people, they're just Romans. See, it used to be that Rome controlled Israel. Rome controlled old Palestine, Israel, Judea. And that's where the Jews lived, the people, the quote-unquote holy people, the people who knew about spiritual things, essentially. And they were controlled by the Romans. So what happened was of course, the Romans pierced Jesus. So the Roman pierced Jesus' side. So these American doctors out here, they don't know anything about what we know. So they're Romans. So the Roman doctor took a knife and pierced Don Parnell's side, and he was thought, he's over 60. He was thought, well, he might bleed out. So what come out? Blood and fluid. He had a fluid tube coming out of his side, draining the fluid out. So he had blood and water. The Roman doctor pierced his side, and blood and water came out. Okay. Then what happened was he was talking about how that he had been through excruciating pain for like 3 or 4 days, and he's praying. He's like, if I can just go on, and this pain's so terrible. The crucifixion, been nailed, the terrible pain that Jesus went through for 3 days, or for X amount of, and then been put it behind in the cave for 3 days. Okay, so anyway, but he went through that excruciating pain of the torture of it, and for 3 or 4 days, and he's like, if there's something I can do to go to the other, just go ahead and go to the other dimension. If there's something I can do there, just let me go ahead and go on. That's what he was talking about, praying essentially. So anyway, what happened was that he went through the excruciating pain. He was crucified, and he went through the excruciating pain of being crucified through that surgery that he went through. And then he came out on the other end of it, and just like Jesus was crucified and killed. Okay, he did go to the other dimension. You see, Don. I know this is going to sound crazy. Don did not make it. Don actually died right there on the operating table. He didn't make it. You all say, well, how can that be? He just preached last Tuesday. We all seen him here. He preached. He couldn't have went to the other dimension. Yes, he did. He did go to the other dimension, because you have to understand what the other dimension is. See, his prayer was answered. There was something for him to do in the other dimension, because what the other dimension is not what everybody thinks it is. What the other dimension is like, try this. The rapture we thought was actually a physical going to some place that was heaven, but we later understood that it was only a revelation. It was only a greater understanding. To get a rapture was the greater understanding. Okay, so now we were going to be raptured to where? Heaven, of course. What is heaven? Heaven is the same thing that the rapture was. Heaven is simply, it's not a place. It's not a different type of a physical dimension. It is only a greater understanding. Heaven is a greater understanding, because when you get raptured, where the heck are you going to go? Heaven. So if you get raptured to a greater understanding, where's heaven? It's greater understanding. That's all it is. The rapture, everybody said, what happened was, and this one blows me away. People, they're all like, Third Coming people and all that, they can say, we say, the rapture wasn't going to a physical place to eat physical chicken and rice. The rapture was just it was a revelation to a greater understanding. And they say, yeah, brother, yeah, that's right. But whenever you come around and say, yeah, and guess what, guys? Heaven itself was not an actual physical place either, but it was just a greater understanding. Then they're all like, oh, no, heavens, no, that's some place where I will go to after we die. Well, that would technically be true, but you got to understand how and what it is. They can say, well, the rapture, now that is a revelation and greater understanding, but heaven, no, that's still some physical place. No, none of it's physical. Not one damn bit of it's physical. The rapture was not physical, and heaven is not physical. It's an understanding. It's a greater understanding. It's a condition of a greater understanding of where you're at mentally. Okay? When you're in heaven, that means you have a greater understanding. You have transcended into a dimension of a greater understanding. So what happened was when Don was on that table, he said, if you can let me just go ahead and die and go on, and, well, I'm saying die, but, maybe you did say that, whatever. He was saying, he said, just let me go ahead and go on to that other dimension. Maybe if there's something that I can do there, just let me go ahead and go on. This excruciating pain is terrible. Well, I'm here to tell you, he did it. I'm here to tell you today that is exactly what happened. His prayer was answered. He did. He didn't have to suffer no more. He went on to that other dimension, and he is there now, or here now, doing the thing there that he prayed and wanted to do. Because what happened was he got a greater understanding of things, and he transcended the dimension of the Third Testament and the love divinic ideologies fighting each other and all that stuff. He transcended that dimension, and now he's in a dimension of sheer unity, of heaven by comparison to that. He did go into the next dimension. He did die. He literally died. And his disciples had no idea what was going on. He did die. His love divinic disciples had no idea what was going on. He did die, and he is now over in this dimension, in this plane of understanding that is greater than all that, doing something here, but except he didn't go nowhere. He didn't, except he did go somewhere, but see, he himself said, y'all got to understand this, he himself and William Branham both all said that everybody thought heaven was out here somewhere. Heaven is occupying the same space as you see. So it's occupying, then it got to the idea that heaven was occupying the same space. It wasn't out here. It was just an unseen dimension occupying the same space. Well, I'm here to tell you now, folks, that when Don Parnell's in heaven now, but he's occupying the same space. That same dirt that made up Don Parnell since, what was his mom and dad's name? Opal and Lehman Parnell birthed him in 1950, whenever, in Lafayette, Indiana. That same dirt that made him up it's still the same place, the same dirt. But he has transcended into another dimension. He's transcended into heaven. He already went. It's just, and nobody knows. Look, listen to me. Let me tell you something. Whenever you all figure this out, and whenever you all understand where he's at, see, Jesus died, but did he really die? Well, yeah, he died, and but he rose, 3 days later? Okay, yesterday was just Easter. Okay, timely enough for you? Is it timely enough that we should have an Easter message to talk about the risen Savior, about Don Parnell going through surgery, and how that everything that happened to him was just exactly like Jesus? Is this time? Okay, so anyway, what happened was Jesus died, but he came back, and he was seen of his disciples and everybody. Well, what do you think's going on right now? See, Don's out here right now, and he's talking with these people. He's talking with people right now, and they don't even know who he is. They don't know that he is the Christ, the risen Christ, because they don't know that he went through this. He's talking to these love divine people. He's writing them on Facebook, and he's like, they're writing him and saying, "How you doing there? I got a question about such and such and such," and he writes them back and says, "Blah blah 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 blah," and this is the way that it is, or whatever. and they don't even know that they've been talking to the Messiah, the risen Messiah. They didn't know that Jesus, who he was. He communed with them, and they didn't even know who he was. I'm telling you, Don Parnell has already ascended, transcended into another dimension, another understanding out here. And heaven is just simply a greater understanding than where we were at. That's all it is. You transcend dimensions. You go a dimension higher into heaven. That's all it was, right? It was a dimension higher than this one, right? Okay, or, well, that's the way we used to look at it. But it was, hypothetically, it was a dimension higher than the physical plane, whatever. Okay, but what it is it's a dimension higher in the spiritual plane, essentially. Or it's a dimension of understanding greater than the one you were at. That is how you go to heaven. So he is in heaven. He already transcended through the crucifixion on the Roman doctor's operating table, the cross, and he has went into another dimension of understanding, and it's unity. He's preaching another message now that's not, he's talking about a transcended ideology of things, that this unity transcends even love divinic oneness, essentially. It transcends things like that. As true as they were, it transcends things like that. He's gone over into the other dimension, and he is doing the things there that he prayed about doing. He said, if there's something you can let me do there, just let me go ahead and do it. Let me go ahead and die and do it. That's exactly what happened. And he's appearing to you disciples out here. You love divine disciples of Jesus who love Jesus, who love Don Parnell. He is, if you can see it, if you can catch it, you can see him. He is still here. He didn't die. He's still here, but you got to understand who he is and that what he did, and he is communing with you right now if you can see who he is. But you got to understand who he is. You got to understand, see, I'll tell you something. I used to say a long time ago. When it come to like William Branham, see, Don Parnell saw William Branham alive, and that's what, the New York visions and whatnot, and that is what made him to where, when I say made, you could use that as an Italian term, because to make somebody was to, in Italian terms, was to make them a part of the mafia family. Okay, but that's what made him to be the, dare I say, the bona fide prophet of the age, was to see William Branham, because that was the thing that everybody was looking for, was to see William Branham. Well, Don Parnell saw William Branham, okay, after he was dead. Now look, here's the qualifications of it. You had to see William Branham after he was dead. Okay, that's what ushered the thing forward. That's what ushered the age of the things forward, because William Branham and Christ and all that was the Christ there. And then the disciples were the ones, once they had seen Jesus risen from the dead, or they seen William Branham, then they understood that he was, his message was literally the Christ having been crucified. But you had to recognize that was what was going on before you could ever see him. And see, so we all recognize, essentially, we all recognize that we had seen the Christ after he had been crucified, or we had seen William Branham's message for what it was, that it was the actual Christ having been crucified. Okay, so we had seen Christ after he had been crucified. Okay, so what you have to do is you have to be able to recognize first that there's been a crucifixion that took place, because it ain't so obvious anymore, dare I say, as perhaps it was back then, although it probably wasn't then either. But you have to recognize that there's been a crucifixion that took place, and then if you see Don Parnell in the transcended message that he's preaching, and understand what he's saying, then you have seen the Christ after he was crucified. And then we can move on with the book of Acts or whatever we're going to do here. So I'm just telling you, you've got to see what's went on here. It's all it's ever about, is not about what's being said, but about what's going on. But you have to say the what's being said to get to the what's going on, because that's what they did. That's what William Branham said, a bunch of stuff, but what was going on was was what was dare I say more important, really. And that's what I'm saying now is you've got to see what's going on here, and that all these things and what's going on to find out what's more important. It's not, Don Parnell can say a bunch of stuff or has said a bunch of stuff, but you've got to see what's really going on. Then you will understand where he is and where you are. And you'll understand that you're already in heaven. This is heaven. I'm already in heaven. He's already in heaven. It's this unity that transcends oneness. It's in heaven. There's no more. It don't matter about whether anybody understands oneness or the devil and God are one or any of this stuff. That had gotten to the point of almost of pretty much denominationalism. It had got to denominationalism, and we've transcended all that. We are beyond the love divine now. If you can see it, we are beyond. We have transcended the love divine. We are into something now that's totally different. We have seen the risen Christ after his crucifixion, and the things that Don is going to say now is going to be the transcension of all that stuff, of what he's already saying. This unity that transcends all that stuff. It's a transcension. It's heaven. This unity of understanding is heaven. It don't matter if we agree on this or that. It don't matter. It's a transcension. It's heaven. This is literally heaven. We are there. We are already there. Truthfully, folks, I've been there for a long time. I've been there for about the past 10 years because I think at the point that it doesn't matter whether you're talking to a Roman or a Jew or a Greek or anything. That's pretty much whenever you get to heaven. Whenever you don't care anymore about any of this stuff, about how high that your revelation has gotten to, and you get to a point of just you can talk to anybody out here and it don't matter, that's heaven. The wife's agreeing with me on that one. I've been doing this for years. I remember whenever I left the church, when I say I left the church, but whenever I left disassociated with the whole setup back in what was 2013 or 14 or so, 13 I suppose. That was my mindset. That was where I went to. I had already been there because I knew that I got rid of all that stuff. I got rid of the idea of doing that. That's why I would never associate with the love divinic ideology, because it was as true as it was. I said I'm love divine. It was true. God and Satan are one. Okay, but that don't mean that we don't transcend in a way that's a little different than that. I don't want to sound disingenuous to the Third Testament because that don't really do it justice, because we still have over here Christ defeating the devil. Okay, we still have that. Even though God and Satan are one, we still have that. You have all aspects of things. Okay, but if I did not do the love divine thing because I agreed that it was all right, oneness was right, God and the devil right, but it was denominational in that all the reasons I've said. It was denominational in that, it's like you take a love divine person and a Third Testament person. Well, if they ain't fought like cats and dogs, like denominations like Baptists and Pentecostals, then I don't know what has. I mean, if you ain't been watching this on Facebook for the past 10 years, then I don't know what, you must have been living under a rock in terms of this third coming world. That's been nothing but denominationalism from one side to the other, regardless of how right it was. And so that's why I would never go along with it. And I've been over here in heaven for a long time. I died a long time ago. And not only that, I die daily because I get a new understanding every day. And I transcend into heaven every day by getting a new understanding. Whenever I understood, whatever it is, doesn't matter the revelation, the particular revelation of the day, I die every day and I go to heaven. I die all the time. But when you're over here and you're outside of all that denominationalism, as right as it may have been, and you're outside of that, and you don't care whether you're talking what you're talking about and how high your revelation is and everything that Don Parnell was talking about, and don't matter if you're talking to a Roman out here and some Joe Blow on the street and they don't know nothing about the third coming, never heard of William Branham or nothing, and everybody's just the same, and everything's pretty much just the same. Yeah, I know the love divine. They didn't exactly treat anybody differently, even if they didn't know the message. I know that, but in a sense they did. In a sense it's let's just say it transcends that. As I've said, it transcends all that. And this is something, this unity that Don Parnell is talking about now. The short version of it is this unity that Don is talking about now is transcended all this age that we just came out of. And he has, in fact, went to heaven and is being seen of the disciples now, if you can recognize all this that's went off. If you can, it's just the equivalent of whenever Don seen William Branham after he had been dead, and he's seen him through understanding essentially what had went off there. Well, I'm telling you that you can see Don Parnell now. If you can see the understanding that he's bringing now, you might see his physical body, but if you can see the understanding now, then you will understand that you have seen the Christ after he had been crucified. You're just like those disciples that would see the Christ after he'd been crucified and go back and tell her and be like, yeah, what's it going to be? What's it going to be? Think about this. This is going to be, people are going to see this understanding version of Don Parnell now, this unity version or whatever he's going to go into now. They're going to see this, or see the Christ having come back. And then what they're going to do, they're going to go back to all the disciples. They're going to see that he has actually been crucified through the operating table of the Romans in the hospital. They're going to see all this. And then they're going to go back. It's going to be just like it was in the book of Acts or the book of the Gospels. And they're going to go back and they're going to tell everybody, and they're going to say, y'all ain't going to believe this. We seen the Christ after he was crucified. Well, they're going to go back to their churches now, their Love Divine churches, wherever, and they're going to be like, y'all ain't going to believe this. Don was crucified. He was literally crucified, and now it's an understanding, a great understanding. And they're going to be like, you're going to have Doubting Thomas, and he's going to be like, I don't know about all that, And then some of the others are going to be like, you don't say, really, And they're going to figure we've went into something greater than Love Divine here. We're going to go into some greater understanding of things, But how you do that is you see the Christ. You see him after he has been crucified. But first you have to know that he's been crucified. And that's why I told you about the water and the blood coming out of Don Parnell's liver whenever he got operated on. And he got pierced by that Roman American doctor. And that's why I told you all that. And that's why I told you need to recognize that there's been a crucifixion going on here. First, let's recognize there was a crucifixion going on here. Then secondly, you recognize that Don had went on and is in the heavenly realm of understanding. And then you recognize his understanding, and then you've seen him after he essentially ascended. He ascended in understanding. So anyway, look, I ain't saying I got it all figured out as good as you can figure it out yet, but I'm just saying that I just want people to start thinking, put their thinking cap on and think, and recognize what's going on here, that there's something going on here, that there's been something going on here for about the past 8 months at least that I know of, and that this whole thing's set up. The Last Supper, communion, Don goes and gets crucified on an operating table. Then he comes back. He suffers for 3 days, whatever. He comes back on the 4th day, blah, 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 blah. He's seen of the disciples now. So there you go. Anyway, that was an interesting one. I'm about wore out, but before I let you all go, if anybody listens to this, I just want to tell you, for whoever who may have ever listened to any of the sermons that I have had, it's been, I guess, a bit of a pleasure to tell these. And I know there haven't been a lot, but for whoever that may have, it's been a pleasure. And I just wanted to say that me and a friend of mine was talking the other day, and we was talking about, it was like, well, how many people have ever even, what's the most views you've ever even got on one of your sermons? And I said, probably less than 30. And they was like, well, that's not very much. And I got to thinking about it, and I thought, well, two things. I thought, well, I remember whenever it was, like maybe 2 or 3 or 5, for one thing. And then secondly, I'll just say this: if it gets to be more than 50, I'm going to start worrying, because I might have to find some new message to preach. Because if 50 people understand what I'm saying, then it might be bad. I might be getting to be old fashioned. My message might be getting to be old and traditional if that many people is getting it. So I'll have to come up with something new then, I guess. But it's all a matter of perspective. It's like people say, I wish more people would understand what I'm saying, but really, truly, I don't. I'm glad that people don't understand it, that I am only getting something like, a few views. I would rather it be that way. I would rather, it's no fun if everybody gets it. It's only fun, dare I say, when you're one of the few who do get it. So anyway,